Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here today at the SJ UK Leaders in Security Conference. And for this session, we're going to talk to you about the defining moments during a crisis that shape reputational outcomes. My name is Rachel Miller. I'm a crisis communications and reputation management practitioner, and I've spent the last decade working in agencies to advise CEOs, listed and private businesses, non-profit organisations and individuals during high-stakes situations. I'm currently a director at an advisory firm called Sanctuary, and we support our clients to build, influence and manage their reputations during critical moments. Now, we support them before a crisis, both to mitigate any reputational risk and to ensure that they are prepared. We work with them when shit does hit the fan to help them respond effectively, and we then work with them afterwards to help them rebuild their reputations.
And I'm Beatrice Timpson. I'm also a director at Sanctuary. Before that, I spent 5 years in government working as a communications special advisor. That's to say, I worked directly with government ministers and a couple of prime ministers, advising them on navigating critical moments, steering the department comms functions on their behalf, handling their media, and coordinating with other parts of Whitehall to help them get things done. Some of these roles, such as working for Matt Hancock during the pandemic, or for Liz Truss during the full 49 days of her premiership, gave me plenty of experience for the kind of situations we're going to be talking about today. So, of course, every crisis is unique, but they all have 4 defining moments in common. And we'll talk you through these moments now. There is the uncertainty moment, the escalation moment, the accountability moment, and the recovery moment. For each of these, we'll talk you through the tensions that arise when security, legal, and comms have competing interests, and how best to take a decision when so many voices are pulling you in different directions. As a hint, always listen to comms.
To bring this all to life, we'll talk you through 2 quite different but real-life case studies of crises that Bea and I have handled. I'll talk to you about a major European leisure operator that was the victim of a cyber incident where both its systems were attacked, but physical threats were made to the business too.
And I'll talk to you about what happened when a major fire broke out at an industrial park, which sadly claimed 3 lives, generated a significant amount of national media attention and reputational risk for the park's owners.
So, first, the uncertainty moment. In the case of the cyber breach, it was 5 o'clock on a Friday, because it's always 5 o'clock on a Friday. We received a call that the company's customer website was down, and it was expected that it was the result of a DDoS attack. Whilst the IT team and cyber forensic experts were looking into the situation and shutting down systems, the CEO received an email from a Proton Mail account claiming that they had breached the systems, that they had secured customer data, and they made a financial demand for its safe return. Colleagues and customers start asking questions about why is the website down and what on earth is going on.
And in the case of the fire, I got an urgent call because something was literally on fire. I was more used to the metaphorical version until that point. And at this stage, still no one knew what had caused the fire or how many people were affected. But there was a huge fire engine, police, paramedic presence at the site, and a helicopter up above capturing footage of the blaze, which would go on to top the BBC website, and the news made national bulletins that evening. So for both of these 2 cases, it's clear that a major incident has occurred, But information is very limited. It will take time for the full picture to come together. And some early decisions can't wait. So what do those in charge do? What do they say? Well, it depends on whose advice they listen to. Security says, we don't know anything yet. Legal says, do not confirm anything. Com says, if we do nothing, others will fill the gap. And the public thinks they're hiding something, or in the case of the fire, where's the concern? This is the moment at which a lot of organizations lose control of the narrative because they're reluctant to say anything until they have more information. It's natural, but at the same time, you do not need perfect information to communicate. In fact, if you wait for it, it can often be too late. Instead, you need to show leadership and grip by putting together a short, simple holding statement that can buy you critical time. You don't want to leave others to fill the vacuum.
Moving on to the escalation moment and back to the cyber breach. Although the website was still down, investigations suggested that the systems hadn't in fact been breached. An all-staff email is sent to colleagues, notifying them of the incident, telling them if they see anything untoward they should tell IT, and to be extra vigilant. Shortly afterwards, the company received a call from the police instructing an immediate evacuation of their flagship branch, citing a tip-off about a bomb threat. Simultaneously, customer emails start flooding in, saying that they have been contacted on Instagram by unknown accounts, claiming that the company has been hacked, that their data has been taken. Panic starts to set in.
And in the case of the fire, the flames were calming down, just smoke was rising at this point, but the tension was mounting because the full consequences of this terrible tragedy had come to life. 3 lives had been lost, including 2 from the emergency services. Their families had started to release statements, each a heartbreaking testimony of grief. And questions were starting to be asked. What happened and why?
A crisis develops when the story extends beyond the organisation. The issue moves on and becomes a public event. So what do you say and what do you do in these moments? Well, security says we need to protect the investigation. Legal says we must avoid liability. Comms says we need to show that we're gripping the situation. And the public starts to think, are you really being straight with us? This is the phase where wording becomes critical. The danger is either saying too much, too soon, or saying so little that you look evasive. The question is not, can we say everything? The question should be, what can we responsibly say now? In a crisis, the public rarely judges you when bad things go wrong, but they will judge you about whether they believe you were prepared, whether you're honest, whether you're acting in a human way, and whether you're showing that you are in control. So, moving on to the accountability moment. In the case of the cyber breach, the company received confirmation that thankfully the bomb threat was a hoax, and they were given the green light to reopen the branch. They also received confirmation that their systems hadn't been breached, and whilst customer data had been compromised, it was believed that this had been acquired on the dark web and it was being used as leverage against the company. It was agreed that now was the right time to contact customers to let them know what had happened, what action had been taken, and any next steps that were required.
And in the case of the fire, the embers had gone out, but the media's desire for answers was only growing. A Sunday Times journalist came down to the site and engaged one of the security guards at the gate in conversation. The security guard innocently told her that the site had recently been refurbished and that some of the buildings had had the treatment, but the building in question, at the heart of the fire, had not been. The journalist started to put 2 and 2 together and make 5. The refurbishment was to do with safety. It wasn't. And as a result, the owners were culpable of negligence. They weren't. Often, it is sadly the case that just as the situation seems to be under control and is technically improving, the reputational jeopardy is still growing. And it's easy to imagine how perspectives oppose each other in these circumstances. Security says, we've contained the incident. Legal says, do not admit fault. Comms says, people need to see responsibility, not defensiveness. And the public thinks, do they understand the impact? This is at the point at which you won't be forgiven for not knowing the key facts or for getting them wrong. Tone, as ever, matters too. Companies get punished for appealing to slow, cold, self-protective, or appearing that they themselves are the victim. Early messages can be simple, but as a crisis develops, the organization must become more human, more specific, and more accountable. And it's important to remember that expressing empathy and taking accountability does not mean the same as accepting liability.
And finally, the recovery moment. In the case of the leisure operator, the decision not to pay the ransom was the right one. Customer communications were well received, and the business was lucky that in the short term, there was no media interest in the incident. However, just when everyone thought that the dust had settled, a national reporter started contacting employees, fishing for information about the cyber incident, the bomb threat, and whether the company had paid the ransom. Now, this was a moment that had the potential to reignite the issue in a really big way. So, what did we do? We took the decision to proactively contact the journalist and to explain to them, on background, what had and what hadn't happened. By taking the conversation away from employees and by showing transparency, we took the gotcha moment out of the story, and we were able to convince them not to write the piece.
And in the case of the fire, we handled that Sunday Times inquiry. We impressed on her, in a friendly manner, the legal risk to her of jumping to conclusions without any evidence. We told her of a fire safety certificate that the company had received very recently, and although the client didn't want us to show her the certificate, in the end, it was enough, and the Sunday Times story was spiked. And critically, that meant that we didn't have a whole deluge of other journalists following that story, and we avoided the reputational damage that would have been done long before any official investigation had exonerated the client. And of course, the business had to take steps to be very careful when it reopened. The tone of internal and external comms had to be the very opposite of business as usual.
A crisis ends operationally when the incident is resolved, but it ends reputationally when stakeholders believe that the organisation, individuals involved, have either learned, changed, or reduced the chance of recurrence. If not properly handled, a situation like the ones that Bea and I have been talking today can be terminal for an organisation, although more commonly terminal for its CEO. So, in this moment, security says the matter is considered closed. Legal said we need to consider the legal ramifications. Comms says we have a very long road ahead of us. And the public thinks, can we really trust you again? Now, this is where many organisations are too quick to think that the matter is resolved, or to get tripped up by trying to move on too quickly. Recovering from a reputational crisis like this can take months or even years in some cases, and it's very important that you take the time and patience to see it through.
So we've taken you through a whistle-stop tour of the defining moments of a crisis. And although the examples we give are quite different, as you'll see, there are many similarities in how we handled them, always with the objective of minimizing reputational damage. So here are our key learnings. Stress test comms plans. You can have the best comms plan on paper, but it won't count for anything unless it's properly embedded, well understood, and stress test. In a crisis, leaders need to be focused on the decisions they need to take, not realizing too late that the levers they're pulling aren't connected to anything. Second, make communications central to the response. We would say this, but it is true. Communications professionals need to be at the table for the decision-making process to help advise on reputational impact, not writing the press release once that decision has been taken. Third, don't wait for perfect information. It never comes during a crisis, so don't hold on for it. The organizations that perform the best are the ones that have the trust, the structure, and the discipline to communicate responsibility whilst their understanding of the facts is still moving.
Fourth, organizational culture is critical to drive good outcomes during a crisis. Team members need to feel like they can raise concerns without judgment, that they can escalate issues, that they can constructively challenge their colleagues, and that they can support one another through a period of unprecedented intensity. Fifth, it's common for teams to have the same end goal in a crisis, but to get there through vastly different means. In order to ensure that the external message is both clear and consistent, it's vitally important that legal, security, operation, comms, and people teams are all working seamlessly in partnership together. And finally, it's important to remember that a crisis is not over when the situation is considered contained. The objective shouldn't just be to get through the incident or to hope that the news cycle will pass quickly. The objective should be to ensure the long-term credibility of the organisation, and that takes a lot of time, patience, and careful handling.
So in conclusion, we really hope that no one in this room experiences a crisis. But as the previous panelist said, the cyber threat is getting ever more sophisticated, and sadly, it is getting increasingly unlikely. So the final thing we'd say is that failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And there's no time like the present. So on behalf of both of us, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and hope to meet many of you in the course of the afternoon.